Ladies and gentlemen, buckle up, because today on Boss Economics World, we're diving headfirst into the latest transatlantic trade circus, starring the European Union, Donald Trump, and a tariff tantrum that could tank economies faster than you can say, recession. Oh, and of course, we'll be shining a spotlight on the geniuses in government who seem hell-bent on turning a manageable economic hiccup into a full-blown global meltdown. Spoiler alert, it's not just bad policy, it's economic malpractice, and we're here to satire the heck out of it while dropping truth bombs backed by the latest data. Let's get into it. So, here's the deal, the European Union is down on its knees, begging the US for a trade arrangement that includes a measly 10% universal tariff on many of its exports. But wait, there's a catch. The EU is desperately trying to negotiate lower rates on key sectors like pharmaceuticals, alcohol, semiconductors, and commercial aircraft. Oh, and they're also pleading for quotas and exemptions to dodge the US's insane 25% tariff on automobiles and car parts, not to mention the ludicrous 50% tariff on steel and aluminum. Now, folks, let me break this down for you in plain English. The EU is basically saying, please, sir, can you not completely destroy our economy? We'll take your scraps, but could you maybe not stomp on our face while you're at it? And here's the kicker, the EU has until July 9, 2025, to clinch this deal, or Trump's tariffs on nearly all of the EU's exports to the US will skyrocket to 50%. Yep, you heard that right, 50%. This is the economic equivalent of holding a gun to your trading partner's head and saying, dance, monkey, dance. And why is Trump doing this? Oh, you know, the usual excuses, bringing back domestic manufacturing, paying for tax cuts, and stopping other countries from taking advantage of the US. Sounds noble, right? Except it's a steaming pile of economic nonsense, and we're going to unpack why this is a masterclass in government mismanagement, backed by the latest data and examples that'll make your head spin. Let's start with the surface-level problem and work our way down to the root causes, shall we? On the surface, this is a classic trade war, a tit-for-tat tariff escalation that threatens to disrupt global supply chains, jack up consumer prices, and kneecap economic growth. But dig a little deeper, and you'll see this is a textbook case of government mismanagement, fueled by political posturing, economic ignorance, and a complete disregard for the data. So, let's break it down, layer by layer, and expose the economic dumpster fire for what it is. First things first, let's talk about what tariffs actually do. Spoiler alert, they're not a magic wand that brings back jobs or fixes trade imbalances. Tariffs are a tax, plain and simple. And guess who pays that tax? Not the foreign exporters, not the governments, but you, the consumer. When the US slaps a 50% tariff on EU steel and aluminum, it doesn't mean European producers eat the cost. Oh no, they pass it on to American businesses, who then pass it on to you in the form of higher prices for everything from cars to beer cans. Let's look at the numbers. In 2024, the EU exported €52.8 billion, $62.2 billion, worth of cars and car parts to the US, making it the bloc's largest export destination, according to data compiled by the EU and analysts at ING Group NV. Meanwhile, €24 billion worth of steel and aluminum flowed from the EU to the US, led by Germany, Italy, and France, per the Vienna Institute for International Economic Studies. Now, imagine a 50% tariff on those goods. That's not just a slap on the wrist, that's a sledgehammer to the face of transatlantic trade. American manufacturers who rely on EU steel will see their input costs skyrocket, forcing them to either raise prices or eat the loss. And don't even get me started on the auto industry. Higher tariffs on EU car parts mean your next Ford or Chevy could cost you thousands more. Congrats, folks, you're paying for Trump's America First ego trip. But wait, it gets worse. The EU isn't just going to sit there and take it. Oh no, they're already gearing up for retaliation, with approved tariffs on €21 billion of US goods and a potential additional €95 billion list targeting everything from Boeing aircraft to bourbon. This isn't a trade negotiation, it's economic mutually assured destruction. And who suffers? Not the politicians, not the trade negotiators, but you, the ordinary citizen, and the businesses caught in the crossfire. Now, let's zoom out and look at the ripple effects of this trade war. Tariffs don't just raise prices, they disrupt global supply chains, kill jobs, and tank economic growth. Take the auto industry, for example. The US and EU are deeply integrated when it comes to car manufacturing. According to a 2024 report by the Center for Automotive Research, a 25% tariff on EU auto imports could cost the US economy up to 714,000 jobs and reduce GDP by $62 billion annually. And that's just the US side. On the EU side, German automakers like Volkswagen and BMW, which rely heavily on the US market, could see their profits slashed, leading to layoffs and reduced investment in innovation. But it's not just cars. The EU estimates that US duties now cover €380 billion, or about 70%, of its exports to the US. That's a massive chunk of trade at risk. And let's not forget the impact on small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, which make up the backbone of both economies. According to the European Commission, SMEs account for 99% of all EU businesses and employ two-thirds of the workforce. These companies don't have the resources to absorb tariff shocks or navigate complex trade barriers. They'll either pass on the costs, cut jobs, or shut down entirely. So much for protecting domestic industry, huh? And here's the kicker, the stock market knows this is a disaster waiting to happen. When news of this trade standoff broke, the S&P 500 dropped 12 points in seconds. Sure, it rebounded, but that initial reaction tells you everything you need to know. Investors are terrified of the economic fallout. And they should be. According to a 2024 analysis by Moody's Analytics, a full-blown US-EU trade war could shave 1.2% off global GDP by 2026, pushing both economies into recession. But hey, at least Trump can say he won the trade war, right? Now, let's get to the real issue. This entire mess is a product of government mismanagement and economic illiteracy. Let's start with Trump's tariffs. The idea that tariffs will bring back domestic manufacturing is a fairy tale that ignores basic economics. Manufacturing jobs aren't disappearing because of trade, they're disappearing because of automation and productivity gains. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, U.S. manufacturing output has increased by 40% since 1990, but employment in the sector has dropped by 30%. Why? Because robots and software are doing the work humans used to do. Tariffs won't reverse the trend, they'll just make everything more expensive and less competitive. And don't even get me started on the paying for tax cuts excuse. Trump's 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act added $1.9 trillion to the U.S. deficit over a decade, according to the Congressional Budget Office. Tariffs won't come close to covering that hole, in fact, they'll make it worse by slowing economic growth and reducing tax revenue. A 2024 study by the Tax Foundation found that Trump's tariffs have already cost the U.S. economy $138 billion in lost economic activity and 142,000 jobs. But hey, who needs data when you've got a catchy slogan like, Make America Great Again? On the EU side, the mismanagement is just as bad. The European Commission is playing a dangerous game of brinkmanship, trying to negotiate a deal that slightly favors the U.S., while simultaneously preparing retaliatory tariffs. Newsflash, folks, there's no such thing as a slightly favorable trade war. Once the tariffs start flying, everyone loses. And let's not forget the EU's own economic vulnerabilities. The Eurozone economy is already teetering on the edge of recession, with GDP growth projected at just 0.8% in 2024, according to the International Monetary Fund. A trade war with the US could be the final nail in the coffin, especially for export-dependent economies like Germany, where industrial production has already declined by 4.1% year-on-year as of October 2024, per Eurostat. So, here's the Boss Economics World Hot Take: this trade war isn't just bad policy, it's a government-orchestrated economic disaster that's going to screw over ordinary people while politicians pat themselves on the back. The data is clear: tariffs hurt consumers, kill jobs, and tank growth. The examples are endless. From the U.S. steel tariffs of 2018, which cost 75,000 jobs according to the Peterson Institute for International Economics, to the EU's retaliatory tariffs on Harley-Davidson, which forced the company to shift production overseas. And yet, here we are, in 2025, watching our so-called leaders repeat the same mistakes, all in the name of political theater. But don't take my word for it, look at the latest data. The World Trade Organization reported in its October 2024 World Trade Outlook that global trade growth is projected to slow to 2.7% in 2025, down from 3.4% in 2024, largely due to rising trade barriers. Meanwhile, the Conference Board's leading economic index for the U.S. has been flashing warning signs of recession since mid-2024, with a 0.5% decline in October alone. And in the EU, consumer confidence is at its lowest level since the COVID-19 pandemic, according to the European Commission's November 2024 Economic Sentiment Indicator. This isn't just a trade spat, it's a recipe for a global economic meltdown, courtesy of our fearless leaders. So, what happens if the EU and US don't reach a deal by July 9, 2025? Well, folks, buckle up, because it's going to be a wild ride. If Trump walks away and hikes tariffs to 50%, the EU will retaliate with its €95 billion tariff list, targeting everything from Boeing planes to Kentucky bourbon. The result? A full-blown trade war that could cost the global economy $1 trillion in lost output, according to a 2024 simulation by Oxford Economics. And don't forget the geopolitical fallout. Strained US-EU relations will weaken the West's ability to counter economic threats from China, which is already licking its chops as it watches its rivals tear each other apart. But hey, maybe I'm being too pessimistic. Maybe the EU and US will reach an interim agreement to kick the can down the road. Except, as the Bloomberg report notes, officials can't even agree on how long such an arrangement would last. Translation: even the best-case scenario is a chaotic mess that leaves businesses and consumers in limbo. And let's not forget the EU's simplification agenda for non-tariff barriers, which sounds like a fancy way of saying, will make it slightly less painful for you to get screwed. Gee, thanks, Brussels. Here at Boss Economics World, we don't just point out the problem, we offer solutions. And the solution to this mess is simple: fire the clowns running the show and embrace free trade. The data is overwhelming: free trade lifts all boats. According to the World Bank, global trade liberalization since the 1990s has lifted over 1 billion people out of poverty and boosted global GDP by 10%. Meanwhile, protectionism, like the kind Trump is peddling, has a track record of failure. Just look at the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930, which deepened the Great Depression by slashing global trade by 65%, per the U.S. State Department's historical archives. So, to our audience of ordinary folks and finance pros alike, here's the takeaway: don't let the politicians fool you. Tariffs aren't winning, they're losing, big time. And the sooner we kick these economic illiterates out of office, the sooner we can get back to building an economy that works for everyone, not just the egos in Washington and Brussels. Well, folks, that's all for today's episode of Boss Economics World. Remember, while our governments are busy playing tariff roulette, it's your wallet, your job, and your future on the line. So, stay woke to the economic nonsense, and maybe, just maybe, we can stop these clowns from driving us all off a cliff. Until next time, keep your eyes on the data, your hands off the panic button, and your faith in the free market. This is Boss Economics World, signing off, because someone's gotta call out the madness.